I'm curious, those books behind you, that big volume with
Yes.
gold and air.
Yeah.
What are those books? I'm just curious.
Well, this is something written by someone called Sheikh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, who was like nearly like 800 years after the Prophet ﷺ. And he is one of the biggest scholars in Islamic history, essentially. This is a voluminous work called Majmu' al-Fatawa, which is essentially a work of jurisprudence giving verdicts on certain matters. Like, okay, why is the verdict on X, Y, and Z, or not doing X, Y, and Z? This whole voluminous work is just about that. And in every other kind of matter you can think about. These volumes have different subjects. Like some will say about the prayer, some will say about this, about that. So these verdicts that are recorded are about different topics. So it's a very voluminous work, for example. If you're referring to this one, yeah.
Yes, I would imagine that many of the footnotes in that document, would cite itself, lend authority, and treat the Quran as its legal authority. Is that the case? In other words, that collection of books largely refers back to the Quran as the law, as the thing to account by. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. The scholars are not authority within themselves. So whatever they say, they have to use evidences from the Quran or the teachings of the Prophet to kind of make it binding for believers to follow, essentially. If there's no evidence from the Quran, then it's not, or the Prophet's teaching, it's not binding for us to follow.
So when the Quran was delivered, if it was delivered as a divine document that addresses everything, why was it not delivered as all of those books behind you? Instead, it was just delivered in this one little volume.
You asking me why was the Quran not delivered as tens of thousands of voluminous works that expound on the Quran? Is that your question?
Well, my question is, it seems to me, here's where I'm coming from with the question. It seems to me that if the Quran is a divine document which addresses all areas of life, why is there a need for dozens of documents that sit behind you to interpret what the complete testament or witness of God said in the first place? Why was there confusion enough on the document, on the original Quran, to necessitate all of that commentary sitting behind you?
Well, that same Quran that you're reading, that you're saying is guidance in this case, is
I'm not saying that. You're saying that. You're the one saying the Quran is guidance in this case, not me.
Now, there's a little bit of increase in volume, and I hope we still remain in the same cordial discussion that we're having. There's no need for you to... I don't want you to mischaracterize my position. Because I do have this kind of repeated always action that happens when I speak to atheists. They get very agitated for some reason when I'm speaking, and they get very upset, and I end up removing them. And I hope that does not happen, and we can keep it cordial for a few more minutes at least. So regarding I was just saying what you said in this example, that if it's supposed to be guidance, then you're already affirming in this example that it is guidance. So when I quote it to be guidance, you cannot then disagree with me and shout at me for some reason. So if you're saying in this case the Quran is supposed to be guidance, in the example that you're given, I'm well aware that you don't believe it. In the example that you're given, if the Quran is supposed to be guidance, a part of that Quran tells you to go to the people of knowledge. The people of knowledge and the Prophet's life will be an explanation, and the examples of his prophets and companions will be an explanation for you to understand how to live by this book. So that a part of the Quran directs you to those people of knowledge, because it's also directing you by guidance that, that not everyone has the same level of understanding. Someone might take the Quran and understand it very well. Someone might understand it less. That would need someone to help him, give him a little bit of expounding, teach him a little bit. That doesn't mean it's confusing. Expounding upon something which is wise does not necessitate that the statement that was made was confusing or incorrect.
The Hadith, for instance.
Yeah, the Hadith or anything. The Prophet is the example, as the Quran says for us. For example, Allah says, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. You had in the Prophet of Allah a great example for whoever wishes the last day. Whoever wishes goodness in the last day, you had an example in the Prophet. So we look at the life of the Prophet, how he lived his life. Allah tells us about his companions and those who followed them, not just his companions, but we have tabi'un and atba'i tabi'un, the generations, couple of generations that came after, because the Prophet told us that the best of generation is my generation, i.e. in faith and belief and adherence, and those who come after them, then the one who come after them. So for us to take and learn from these early generations, and this is, for example, what you'll see Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and this voluminous work is doing. He's referring to these people, the companions of the Prophet who learned directly from him because he was the example, or the students who took from them, or the students of the students who took from them.
So the Quran itself is not the final revelation.
When did I say that? I was just answering right now.
I'm asking, is the Quran the final revelation?
Yeah, Quran is the final revelation. Yes.
Then why are there revelations and guidances which come after it?
Where is the revelation that is coming after it?
They're sitting right behind you.
Did I claim that the works of Ibn Taymiyyah was revelation?
Is it guidance?
No, you said revelation, and now we changed it to guidance.
I said guidance. I said guidance.
Please
allow me to speak. May you allow me to speak so that you don't misrepresent? I feel like you're
asking me a question, and whenever I speak, you interrupt me and then say to allow you to speak. That makes no sense.
Well, I would like to have a dialogue.
You want to speak?
Sure.
Okay,
yes.
but when you ask me a question, do not interrupt me mid-answering, please. Go ahead.
Okay,
because your question was, is it a revelation? Is the books before? I was answering, and then you interrupted me. So you pick one. Do you want me to speak or you don't want me to speak? Go ahead.
Thank you for permission to speak on your stream. I appreciate it. So if the Quran is the final revelation, and that final revelation guides you towards the teachings which will come after it, and the teachings of the disciples of Muhammad and so forth, the Quran itself cannot be the final guidance and revelation, because there is additional guidance as revealed, as God says will be revealed to people who come after. For instance, the caliphs and the imams which came after. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, because no one said in this conversation from my side that the books behind me are revelation. We are saying that they expounding. Guidance? Again, you see, I'll let you speak. I can easily let you speak, but you cannot let me speak for some reason, because I'm going to refute what you say, with all due respect. So none of us have said that the books behind me is revelation. The only revelation that we believe is binding. And in fact, I answered that in the beginning of this conversation. I said any scholarly work is not binding. And you were supposed to be listening to me. I hope you were. When I was describing that, I was clarifying clearly that whatever in this book, unless it's backed up by the Quran or Hadith, is not binding for me as a Muslim. So there is a lot of things that can be written here in this voluminous work that I can easily reject. I can say, okay, that's the opinion of a scholar at a specific point of time, but I do not need to accept, because that's not a revelation coming from God that is expounding on the revelation, just explaining to me the revelation. But somehow either you're conflating explanation of revelation as revelation, which is obviously no one makes that point ever in history, but it's a new point, so it's good to listen to new points of view. Go ahead. Yeah.
So the expounding or the explanation that you just said that are in those books, that you could choose whether or not to accept or reject. Did I characterize that correctly?
No.
Oh, you didn't say that? Okay.
No. I said...
You say it again.
Oh, no problem. I'll say it again. I'll say it slowly. The books behind me is a work of a scholar. Scholarly work by itself is not binding. What is binding is the Quran and Hadith. So if a scholar gives evidence from Quran and Hadith, I follow it because it's Quran and Hadith, not because it's a scholarly statement. He's just explaining that scholarly statement or expounding upon that scholarly statement. The meaning of the scholarly statement, the meaning of that revelation, is not introducing new revelation or a new meaning or an opposite meaning to what the text already says.
Are you ultimately relying on your own interpretation of the Quran when deciding whether or not to abide by the teachings from those scholars?
No, I don't rely to I don't base my life on my own interpretation of the Quran. We believe that is what misguided the previous civilization. I base everything on the Quran and Hadith and the life of the Prophet, how he understood the Quran, how he applied the Quran, and his companions, how they understood the Quran, how they applied the Quran, and their students and their students. And the scholars who expound the meaning of the Quran, that the Quran itself tells me to learn from them.
Are there scholars of the Quran whose interpretations and explanations of the Quran you personally disagree with?
Absolutely, yeah. 100%. There's no doubt about that, yeah. There is many, absolutely. But it's not I personally disagree with. It's not that I personally disagree with. It's that they do not have sufficient evidence to back up their point. So the reason I would disagree with them or reject their positions is because it's not backed up by evidence, while another position opposite to them will be backed up by evidence. So it's not about my personal preference. It's about what the text shows me to follow and not to follow.
Which text?
The Quran and Hadith.
Do both? Okay, so scholars in the group that you agree with and scholars in the group that you disagree with on various points, do they both not use the Quran as their same base source text?
Not necessarily, no. For example, I'll give you a very basic example. There are schools of thought in jurisprudence. For example, there's a school of thought, and in a called the Hanafi, for example, and they have a position on marriage. When you conduct the marriage ceremony, is there a necessity for us to have 2 witnesses during the marriage ceremony? And the position of the Hanafi, for example, is you don't need 2 witnesses. The overwhelming majority of the rest of the scholars say, no, you need witnesses. Now, in this case, when you look at the Hanafi position, they don't have evidence saying that you don't need, while the other side have clear-cut evidence from the Prophet that there is no marriage without 2 witnesses. And any marriage that was conducted without 2 witnesses is considered invalid. So in this case, someone might ask, okay, why did they take that position to begin with? The reason is that narration of the Prophet did not reach them. The information did not reach them. So they based the ruling without the evidences reaching them, while we still have the evidences from the other overwhelming majority of scholars. So we do not take that position of that scholar because he does not have evidence to support his claim. Does that make sense now? I hope so.
That makes sense. Sure. So what you're saying is that there was a latency period between God revealing something or the Prophet interpreting something from that revelation and the news actually reaching to the people, at least regarding how many witnesses to have at a wedding.
No. I said that the overwhelming majority of scholars already have the evidences reaching them, while one person in this case, or one view, or one school of thought, did not, in this particular matter, get the evidence. But the evidences was there with if the overwhelming majority of scholars disagree, they disagree because the news reached them. So if one individual somewhere, in some place, did not hear evidence for something, that does not mean that there was a latency of God's guidance reaching the people. That just means that that one individual did not hear that specific point regarding that specific issue.
When that one individual,
Muslims, you know? Yes.
When that one individual did hear that point, did they change their view?
Yeah, there are many. There actually, Abu Hanifa himself, actually, may Allah have mercy on him. He said, not only him, but all of the imams of the 4 schools of thought in Islam, they said that if anything I say goes against the text, reject it. And whenever they saw evidences opposing some of what they believed in, they changed it. In fact, a prominent example of that is Imam Shafi'i, who was another imam of one of the schools of thought, the Shafi'i school of thought. He had one position when he was in one land, and when he traveled in Iraq and Egypt. He changed many of his views when he came across a lot of the evidences that he did not know before. So he changed his previous positions into new positions. So now, and this is the easy way for us, the work is all done. What we need to do as Muslims is we look at the scholarly opinions. We look at the evidence. If there is evidence supporting, and most of the time, the overwhelming majority of the scholars will have the evidence. And the people who didn't, they probably have missed the evidence here or there, which is very easily demonstrated because they don't have evidence to support their point. So we will go with the overwhelming majority of the scholars, and the guidance is already there and present in every civilization. And if you read these books and research, you'll find them.
So you say the work is already done?
Yeah. The work is already. Which, if you're referring to jurisprudence, most of the work is done. Yes, unless there is some new thing happening today, technology or this or that. Other than that, really, the work is done. Yeah, absolutely. If you open, that's why we have massive voluminous works like this, because these massive voluminous works expand on these evidences and positions.
So why are there still legal and religious denominational disagreements between Muslims if the work has been done? If the matter is concluded?
Yeah, because and I'm going to answer this, then I'm going to ask you a few questions, because I've given you like plenty of time to ask me questions, and there are people in the backstage as well. So the reason is simple, is very simple. The reason is not everyone defers to the evidence when there's a disagreement. There are people who have diseases in their heart. There are people who like to follow their own desires. There are people who intentionally want to change the text. There are people with harmful intentions. There are hypocrites that pretend to be Muslims while they're not Muslims. There are many reasons why you'll have certain people disagreeing and changing teachings of Islam because they just don't like what the text says. And that does not change the reality that the guidance is there. And if you were to look, you would find the guidance in the end. And that the Quran itself teaches you. If you disagree over anything, you have to return it to the text. It's mentioned explicitly in the Quran in chapter 4 that obey Allah, obey the messenger and those in authority among you. And if you disagree over anything, if you differ over anything, return it to Allah and the messenger. So Allah tells us what to do. And not everyone follows the instructions given in the Quran.